Guess what? There was almost another USS Iowa. There was almost another USS Montana. 20 years before the famous battleships that fought the Second World War, America laid down 6 steel giants carrying those exact same names. 6 of the most powerful battleships the country had ever designed, already taking shape in shipyards up and down the coast. And then, almost overnight, every single one of them was erased. Their steel was cut apart on the slipways. Their guns were hauled away, and their names were quietly handed down to a new generation of ships that would steal all the glory. This is the story of the first South Dakota class, hull numbers BB-49 through BB-54, the 6 cancelled battleships that history forgot. Let's go. To understand these ghost ships, you have to go back to the First World War. In 1916, watching the great naval powers of Europe tear each other apart, the United States Congress passed one of the most ambitious naval building programs in the nation's history. America was going to build a fleet second to none, and the crown jewels of that program were to be 6 enormous new battleships, a class led by a ship named USS South Dakota. But there was a problem. In 1916, a massive battle had just been fought in the North Sea, the Battle of Jutland, the largest clash of battleships in history. And the lessons from that battle were so important that American designers stopped, tore up their plans, and started over, determined to build the most advanced battleships in the world. What they came up with was a monster, and the first thing they got right was the firepower. The battleships America had built up to this point carried 8, or at most 12, 16-inch guns. The new South Dakota class was designed to carry 12 16-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, a 50% increase in firepower over the ships that came before. And these were not the old guns. They were a new, more powerful type of 16-inch weapon, capable of hurling a shell weighing well over a ton across the horizon. On paper, this made the South Dakota class the most heavily armed battleship America had ever designed up to that point. 6 of them were ordered. 6 floating fortresses, each one bristling with a dozen of the most powerful naval guns in American service. But firepower was only the beginning, because to protect all of that, the designers wrapped these ships in something extraordinary. These were classic American battleships, built on a simple, brutal philosophy: out-armor and outgun the enemy, and win the slugging match. So the South Dakotas were designed with thick belts of hardened steel armor, heavy protection against both gunfire and torpedoes, built to stand in the line of battle and absorb punishment that would sink a lesser ship. To carry all that steel and all those guns, they had to be huge. They were designed to displace over 43,000 tons, nearly a third larger than the battleships that came right before them, stretching close to 700 feet long. But all of that armor came at a cost, and it was the same cost that would define American battleships for decades. Speed: the South Dakotas were slow, designed for only about 23 knots. They were built to be an immovable wall of steel, not a sprinter. And that choice to build a powerful but slow battleship was about to collide with an idea that would make them look obsolete before a single one was ever finished. By 1920, the shipyards were roaring to life. Across 5 different locations, from the New York Navy Yard to Newport News to Quincy, Massachusetts, the keels were laid and the hulls began to rise. And here is where the story gets its strangest twist, because of the names on those 6 hulls. BB-49 was South Dakota, BB-50 was Indiana, BB-51 was Montana, BB-52 was North Carolina, BB-53 was Iowa, and BB-54 was Massachusetts. Read those names again. Iowa, Montana, Indiana, Massachusetts. 2 decades before the legendary battleships of World War II, America was already building ships with those exact names, and almost no one today knows they existed. These were the first Iowa and the first Montana, and they were rising fast. South Dakota herself climbed to nearly 40% complete. Everything was on track to give America the most powerful battle line on Earth. And then the entire world decided to stop building battleships. The problem was that America was not the only nation in a shipbuilding frenzy. Britain and Japan were racing to build their own super battleships, and the world was sliding toward a ruinously expensive naval arms race, the kind that had helped ignite the First World War in the first place. So, in late 1921, the major naval powers sat down in Washington, D.C., and did something almost unheard of. They agreed to stop. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 was one of the most successful arms control agreements in history, and it set strict limits on how many battleships each nation could have, and how big they could be. Individual battleships were capped at 35,000 tons. The South Dakotas, at over 43,000 tons, were far too big. They were, in a single stroke of a pen, illegal. On February 8, 1922, the order came down. All work on the 6 ships was to stop immediately. And so the shipyards fell, silent. At the moment they were suspended, the 6 hulls sat at wildly different stages, some barely 11% complete. Others, like South Dakota, nearly 40% finished, their great steel frames already towering over the water. For over a year they simply sat there, frozen, while the Navy decided what to do with them. There was hope, briefly, that some might be converted, saved, repurposed into something else. But the treaty was final. In late 1923, the order came to scrap them all. Workers who had spent years building these giants now climbed back onto the slipways to tear them apart, cutting the massive hulls into pieces right where they stood. 6 of the most powerful battleships America ever designed were dismantled before they ever touched the water. But the story of their steel does not quite end on those slipways, because these ghost ships were about to serve their country in the strangest way imaginable. Because here is the incredible part. The South Dakotas were cancelled, but they were not entirely wasted. Their powerful 16-inch guns, already forged and ready, were pulled from the yards and handed over to the United States Army, where they were mounted as massive coastal defense guns, guarding American harbors for decades. Their armor and their boilers were stripped and recycled, used to modernize the older battleships that survived the treaty, the very ships that would go on to fight at Pearl Harbor and beyond. And in perhaps the most poetic twist of all, some of the enormous armor plates originally forged for these ships sat unused in the shipyards for nearly 20 years, until the Second World War, when they were finally shipped down to reinforce the locks and defenses of the Panama Canal. The ghost ships never sailed, but their steel went to war anyway, scattered across the country, quietly defending the nation they were never allowed to serve. And so what do we make of the 6 cancelled battleships of the South Dakota class? In one sense, their cancellation was a triumph. The Washington Naval Treaty stopped an arms race that could have bankrupted the world, and it kept the peace at sea for over a decade. Building these ships might have been a colossal waste. 6 slow, expensive battleships that would have been aging relics by the time the next war came. But in another sense, they are one of the great what-ifs of naval history. Imagine a first Iowa, a first Montana, sailing into the Second World War alongside their famous namesakes. It never happened. Instead, their names were passed down, recycled like their steel, given to a new generation of faster, deadlier battleships that would earn all the fame these first 6 were denied. The original South Dakota, Indiana, Montana, North Carolina, Iowa, and Massachusetts exist now only as a footnote, a fleet of ghosts, dismantled on the slipways before they could ever prove what they might have been. If you enjoyed this journey into the ships that never were, subscribe, because we are working our way through every warship the United States ever built, the legends that sailed, and the ghosts that never got the chance.